lucky to have Dr. Kanti Pertiwi joining us for a kind of a bonus session of ISG. She was a late addition, so maybe not everybody got the message in time. But Kanti is going to be speaking about basically the topic of the article that she just recently wrote in the Journal of Business Ethics with Susan Ainsworth. Terrific article, and congratulations on getting that published. So the topic of the title of that article, and also the title of the talk today, is Democracy is the Cure, Evolving Constructions of Corruption in Indonesia, 1994 to 2014, although maybe you want to bring it past 2014 now, I don't know. So yeah, I think it's probably time I just hand over to Mbak Kanti. Silakan.
Baik, thank you so much Pak David. Saya boleh share screen ya?
Boleh. Maybe I should have said in the meantime that Mbak Kanti is a lecturer at the University of Indonesia and was graduated from the University of Melbourne and also spent a bit of time in Perth. There you are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to find the button here. Button. Okay, one. Okay, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Pak David. I would like to first express my gratitude for the opportunity given to present my talk today, which is about the paper that just recently published in the Journal of Business Ethics. This is a co-authored paper. It's based on my PhD at the University of Melbourne, and it was also inspired by my own professional engagement with the Anti-Corruption Commission. So before coming to UI to teach, I was a staff member at the Anti-Corruption Commission in Indonesia. Okay. What else do I want to say? Okay, so I also want to explain a little bit my encounter with the Indonesia study group. It was in 2017 because my husband was assigned to the Indonesian Consulate General there in Perth, and that's how I got involved in the Indonesia study group. And after 3 years, we went back home, and I was sort of sad because I thought, oh, I couldn't join anymore. But then because of COVID and everything, everything moved online, and I'm very grateful that I still get to connect with my friends at UWA, and hopefully in the near future, probably UI and UWA could set up some joint conference or research workshop or whatever that will sort of help all the students and also early career researchers such as myself to share about our research and publications and everything. So that's a little bit of introduction. I didn't really want to talk too much repeating what's already in the paper, but I will focus on some of the key arguments in the paper to sort of give a little bit of background, and then we can have more time for discussion. So maybe less than 30 minutes. Yeah, Pak David, is that okay, Pak?
Boleh.
Okay. Okay. So I will start with this one to give you a bit of context. The paper talks about corruption in Indonesia, especially looking at the discourse of corruption. The Corruption Perception Index, as you already may be familiar with this one. It is a very successful brand of the global anti-corruption movement. It is widely used, widely cited, and I think everyone here probably have a little bit of discussion about corruption in Indonesia in their own research or in their own dissertation. But there's another side of this index that not many scholars actually talked about. Okay, in terms of the literature, in my dissertation, in the beginning, especially in the beginning of my study, I started to look at how previous scholars have approached corruption. So to make it simple, I put this in a table, a 3-column table. The first column will be the mainstream or the rationalist approach to corruption. And the second and the third one are more related to each other, the interpretive or the anthropological and the post-colonial. In the first column, you will find research that treats corruption as an objective fact or objective element of social reality, and it's measurable. You see the different index that's being produced by different institutions, and most often they use an outsider perspective to corruption, or called as ethic perspective. And then they use a lot of statistical modelings and mathematical modelings to show causal relations and also to draw generalizations. And this type of research actually underpin much of the corruption intervention or anti-corruption interventions that we see in the world today, that they focus on the individual responsibility. So corruption largely happens because of problematic individuals or problematic cultures. That's why we have expressions such as rotten apples, rotten barrels, and this results in a whole range of surveillance technologies, if you can put it that way. So to make sure that no one can deviate from the rule, so to speak. And there's lots of standardization, including anti-bribery management system, ISO, different ISO, international standardization and all that. And then my research sort of challenged this mainstream or rationalist perspective on corruption and tried to look at it from more interpretive and also from post-colonial lens in this paper specifically. The interpretive or anthropological moves away from this treatment of corruption as an objective fact of social life, and instead argues that corruption is a social construction, and gives emphasis on insider's perspective or emic perspective. And they largely use qualitative methodologies to capture multiple understandings, situated understandings, and it's more interested in the historical aspect of corruption, also gives attention to how language is used in different practices many people label as corruption, and question also the simplified sort of notion of agency, and bring in the discussion about structure and how is anti-corruption intervention can be contextualized. And as part of this interpretive approach, there is the post-colonial approach that also treats corruption as a social construction, but then extends it by arguing that anti-corruption is a colonial discourse, meaning that anti-corruption has been used by the colonizer, the Western or the global North, to sort of advance their agenda and their interests. And there's an emphasis on global South as the periphery, whereas the North as the core. And they talk a lot about unequal power relations, and also the idea that scholars, post-colonial scholars, wish to defamiliarize Eurocentric ideas, including anti-corruption. Okay, so from that brief overview, so how can we study corruption? In my own research, I talk about corruption as a social construction. And here's another example from Lucy Cochlin, who wrote about corruption as an empty signifier, taking the context of Africa. So the idea is that we don't take corruption for granted. We examine how language is used to construct corruption. So asking questions like, how do we come to this? I mean, how do we come to this understanding of corruption? Why do we see corruption the way we see corruption? It's along those lines. So when you start asking about all these things and you pay attention to media discourse is an important medium where people sort of learn about things, they pick up their knowledge and their attitude and also ideologies from media discourse. And I want to just give you some examples. So in the Sydney Morning Herald in 2007, there was an article that clearly portrays Suharto as the #1 most corrupt leader in the world. And consequently, people would think Indonesia as the top most corrupt country. And then, whereas in the other article in 2016, this was a coverage of the anti-corruption summit, the Global Anti-Corruption Summit, and there was a statement from Jeffrey Sachs, who said that to end corruption, we actually need to start with the US and the UK. They allow it in broad daylight. So the context was I think it was the tax havens at that time. So we can see that different media have different portrayals of corruption. So it's very interesting to look at this from the perspective of media discourse, which is the focus of my paper, or my co-author paper with my supervisor at Melbourne University. Okay, just to remind you from the paper itself, I'm sure many of you have read it. There are two different theoretical lens that we've used. The first one is post-structural theory, and then the second one is the post-colonial theory. In post-structural theory, we talk about corruption as an empty signifier that different actors can mobilize for different purpose. Whereas in the post-colonial theory, a lot of the scholars talk about how anti-corruption as a colonial discourse actually privileges Western history and culture, and sort of undermine or marginalize other histories and cultures. So I use these two theoretical lenses to look at the hegemonic discourse of anti-corruption. There's an article by Brito and Gebel in 2012 that succinctly captured the arguments of these hegemonic discourses where corruption is bad and that democracy is good. So democracy is sort of the way out, the solution, or the cure to corruption. And from these, we formulated the questions, which were what relationships and meanings are discursively constructed for corruption. So the focus has been on meanings and the relationships of corruption and democracy, because these two are sort of often put as the central arguments in these hegemonic discourses. So my question, or our question, was how is corruption constructed in relation to democracy, and how these constructions shift over time. Okay, in terms of methods, our methodology, to be more specific, we use critical discourse analysis, which is a textual analysis with a sensitivity towards power relations and domination. We use focus on metaphor, so because metaphor is central to our ordinary conceptual system, it's often taken for granted, but we actually rely on metaphors to construct our world. So metaphors as well have been used by a lot of important figures, political actors in the media, in textbooks, in all different documents. And we also gave a focus on a historical view of time, which means we focus on specific context. So political events can be sort of the demarcating points. It's not so much about the timing as in from January to December, but we pay attention on events, political events as well. And we identified patterns of arguments similar to in other qualitative methods. We don't use any softwares, but we use, what do you call it, manual coding. So from one article to another, we did a close reading and tried to develop categories inductively. Okay, so here's a table of summary of the episodes that we've sort of tried to map out in the paper, what sort of metaphors that are being used in different episodes. For example, we see the move from health-related metaphors to a more talking about government system and how corruption is massive and it's decentralized. And in relation to democracy, we see a distinctive shift in terms of how democracy was initially seen as the cure, straightforward cure, and then it became complex, and democracy sort of actually made corruption worse. And then in the end, the narrative becomes, no matter what, we need to protect democracy. So democracy became an end in itself. Okay, so David actually was curious. So what happens now, like after 2014? How does this play out in the media? I mean, like the relationship between democracy and corruption. I haven't done any research on that, David. So this is just an article published last year, which sort of signals that, again, democracy is an end in itself, and that corruption is still our common enemy. And then, well, this is Febri Diansyah, if many of you know, he's the spokesman of KPK, but now he's already resigned, I think, from KPK. Okay, so just to conclude, I didn't cover too much details of the paper itself, because I'm pretty sure many of you have sort of at least have a skim of the paper. So to conclude, our argument was that the hegemonic meaning of corruption can no longer be taken for granted. It's very much sort of intertwined with the international agenda of promoting democracy. They are culturally specific and reflect the power dynamics between supranational organizations and nation states in the first and developing world. And just to close with a quote from Robert W. Cox, that theory is always for someone and for some purpose. So I guess I'm just making this call to anyone who's maybe studying corruption to look at this from a different angle and try to be more critical of the dominant narrative and try to explore other ways of making meaning. It can be from based on like a case study. You can sort of interview people, which also part of my own study, look at from the perspectives of different actors, and to try to contribute to knowledge by offering some more nuances on the topic. I think that's all from me. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your comments and yeah, feedback. Thank you, Padi.
Thank you very much for that. And if you can perhaps just stop sharing your screen, and then I can see people, and I can't probably see everybody. So just put up your hand on the, well, hang on. Has anybody got any questions?
Or maybe just comments. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, if nobody else wants to jump in, then I'm certainly happy to do it. So a couple of things, I guess. I mean, you did a really good job of sort of problematizing corruption, and you know, sort of pointing out the the theoretical problems with it, and the making the case that it's a social construction. So I don't know whether you actually arrived at a better way, or if you even tried to actually frame it in a way that is satisfying to you. I mean, and that relates to another question, which is how, when you were working at the KPK, at the Anti-Corruption Commission,
Mm-hmm.
what sort of definition of corruption, I guess, were people there interested in, and was that somehow was that a sort of a different way of looking at corruption that you discovered there compared to the mainstream way? I mean, it's yeah, or what determined what you considered was corruption and what wasn't, and were there debates within the KPK about what should be considered corruption?
Okay, I think I didn't really get the first question. Can you repeat it, Pak David?
I'd probably be more interested in the second question, but the first one was just that, yeah, you really did a good job of problematizing corruption and making the case that it is a social construction. Is there where does that lead, I suppose? Where
oh, what is that your question? Okay, yeah. So if I can answer through your second question, so what were my findings? Because aside from studying media discourse, I also did interviews in my fieldwork. 2014, I went back to KPK and interviewed some of my colleagues there, and also I talked to government people, also from senior to junior positions, and also from the business sector. It's mostly from the business sector. Many of them are from the business sector because I came from a business school. So I'm really curious, how do business people see corruption? And my findings were, actually it's now in my third revision for that one. Hopefully it's going to come out next year. So this empirical, the empirical findings from the interviews that I did spoke a lot about corruption as an expression of care. So even anti-corruption actors themselves, they acknowledge that Indonesians who committed corruption or engage in practices many people label as corruption, they do it in the context of either it's what do you call it, socioeconomic inequality, or because of power inequality. So for example, business people, many of them would say, Mbak Kanti, corruption here is just the way we do business. And we in Indonesia, we cannot be successful and be rich and let the other around us stay poor. So basically, we don't mind sharing our wealth. They use a lot of bagi-bagi, and I think anthropologists have used a lot of this bagi-bagi concept as well, analyzing it. And they also talked about corruption as infak, corruption as sedekah. So it's a form of charity, almsgiving, and all that. But I understand that within the anti-corruption agencies themselves, there are also what do you call it? Some conflict, so contradiction. So they can see this is the situation, but hang on a minute. We also have this what do you call it? Public-private dichotomy, and this cannot continue. And we as a country have to move forward and leave our what do you call it? Traditional practices behind. So there is this tension and dilemma and negotiation, but all of these things are now being ignored. So in the KPK itself, when I was still part of the KPK with all the mereka punya socialization programs, Pak David, they went to different government office and they have this half an hour, 1 hour presentation. They will clearly say, uang lelah, uang terima kasih, uang ini, uang itu, it's all wrong, it's all corruption. So, but when you talk to them like one-on-one, they will be honest with you and say that, oh, this is the challenges, our cultures, our socioeconomic inequality still pave the way for these practices to persist. But then because of their role, because of their own positions, they have to sort of put that aside and still put forward the global anti-corruption agenda with all their doctrines or their maxims of public-private dichotomy and the widely cited definition of corruption as abuse of power of the public office and all that. So the focus has been on public office and not on the private sector, and that's really what I really want to question. Why is that? I think that's my answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak. Pak Greg.
Pak Greg,
thank you.
Yeah, I didn't see. Sorry, yeah, Pak Greg, yeah.
Thanks. I have a similar sort of question, though I'm going to ask you to ponder it in a more theoretical context. One of the accusations that's been brought against anthropologists who engage in a more symbolic interpretive approach is that it keeps them from taking any sort of political stand. I mean, this perhaps of the most famous controversy was that between Louis Dumont saying that hierarchy is a basic value of South Asian, particularly Indian society and Hinduism. And Gerald Berriman, who worked in peripheral communities, and saying, well, if we just accept hierarchy as a symbolic analysis, then how can we fight for the rights of Adivasi, of the so-called untouchables, indigenous peoples, and such? So how do you reconcile taking an interpretive anthropological approach combined with a post-colonial approach with the necessity, especially when you were working with the KPK, of taking a moral stand, of taking political actions? How can you bring that theoretical approach together with the practical political action in the world? Thank you.
Wow. That's a heavy question, Pak Greg. But yeah, it's a very interesting one. I've been trying to answer that myself. I think we talked about this, Pak Greg, when I came to your office maybe 2 years ago. So I think at this point, how do I reconcile that? I would go in with the concept of business ethics as practice. So business ethics should be about contextualizing ethical dilemma. So what is the context, and not to just judge based on abstract principles, thinking that there are ethical principles that are universal and can be applied to any context. So the importance of contextualizing it, and where do you put the critique then? I mean, I'm thinking of bringing this to the next level by arguing the importance of deliberative policy process in formulating anti-corruption policies. So anti-corruption actors really need to engage to people who have been disadvantaged by their policies. I have been talking to my friends in the bureaucracy, and they talked a lot about criminalization in corruption cases related to procurement. So even administrative, what do you call it, kesalahan ya, administrative mistakes now can put you into jail, and where people really didn't have any ill intentions, tidak ada niat jahat gitu ya. So this anti-corruption regime have put a lot of people, a lot of families in a great deal of stress. They have to lose family members or colleagues. They have to be prosecuted. They go to jail and all that. But the critique is actually need to be made against the oligarchs, the sort of people would say it's the political corruption, not the bureaucratic corruption. And in that case, especially looking at what happens today with Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja, I would say it's really important now for people to clarify when they say corruption, which one is it? Which one is it? And who should be who should be the actors that we ask for accountability? Is it just the rank and yank, or just people who are just victims of the system, who really didn't have much choice or much agency in their disposal? And yeah, those are the questions that I really want to put out there. I don't know if that answered your question. Thank you, Pak Greg.
I'm sure that there's some other people out there with questions about corruption. It's part of everyday life for so many people.
Can I ask a question to Ms.
Yes, who is that?
Turn on my video first.
Sure.
Hello.
Oh, hi, yeah.
Hi, my name is Dwageng Babeganda. You can call me Wiki. I'm currently a public servant in the Directorate General of Taxes, Indonesia. And I would like to ask a question to Ms. Pertiwi, but actually it's kind of beyond your paper, which it's okay, but it still has some correlation, of course.
Relevant. Okay, silakan Mas Dwiki.
Okay, Ms. Kanti, let us say that this corruption definition, what you bring in your paper, this corruption term is defined according to fit. This corruption is defined to fit the neoliberalism agenda, the global developmentalism agenda. Then after this, where do you go from this paper? If this definition, if this corruption definition is right, will it stop people? Will it be bad if we follow the guide given by them? Will, as a comparison, will the Palestinians stop praying if Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, recommend them to pray? If we can say that this corruption is bad, yes, it's of course it's defined to fit the neoliberalism agenda. But if it's really good, if it's really bad for development, why should we stop avoiding it? Why should we stop eradicating corruption? Thank you. I hope that makes it clear to you.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting question. So it's interesting if you look at the media discourse itself. I've already given some examples. It's not singular. So in the media itself, there are people who question, why should we have anti-corruption commission? Why can't we have instead anti-poverty commission? So it's maybe the point that I'm trying to make is the goal here shouldn't be about eradicating corruption, but it should be bigger than that. It's not about criminalizing more people and putting more people into jail, but to have to remove inequality, for example, to have a more just society, for example. So we have to have a bigger goal than just eradicating corruption, which in this case we already see it's not so straightforwardly defined. It can be a complex process, and there's lots of actors that are being marginalized in the existing concept. So the question is, how can we make this a bigger goal? I guess that's why, if you want to make political process free from the influence of the oligarchs, for example. So yeah, it's not about eradicating corruption anymore, but more about creating a more just society, I think. Thank you.
Charan, I think there's a question from you.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kanti, for a really interesting paper and really interesting presentation on the social construction of corruption. I have two questions, and I'm not sure if either is a fair question to ask, but I'll try anyway. It's more out of personal interest than anything. The first question is, you demonstrate in the paper that three or four different ways in which discourses are constructed around corruption. What I can't yet see, and maybe this is not clear for me yet, is what types of agendas are these discourses trying to serve? So people mobilize different, discourses of corruption, and I'm just curious to know what are the interests behind that. Are some people suggesting that we should go back to the new order, or some people suggesting something else? Clearly, different people are trying to do different things with different types of discourses. The second question may or may not be a fair question to ask, because I am aware that the discourse analysis draws on data between about 2 or 3 years, right? 2012 to 2014. I'm just wondering, to what extent has discourses on corruption changed over the years following the fall of the new order? Has it gone like from slightly optimistic to total resignation? So yeah, I'm just wondering what it is. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So the first question was about what is the agenda? The agenda of whom are you referring to? Is it?
What are different agendas that different actors who mobilize these types of discourses? The people who use these discourses or subscribe to them, I'm just wondering on what's the range of agendas at work, really?
Okay. Well, I didn't really look at the specific agenda in the paper, but I will try to answer. Well, based on the post-colonial literature, most of the scholars there would make a connection between anti-corruption, good governance agenda and the neoliberal agenda, in which countries are to minimize the role of the state and give what do you call it, more space for private actors to run the economy, so to speak. That's one of the agenda, I think. I'm not sure if that satisfies you, but on the second question, the paper actually looks at the evolution of the discourse from 1994 to 2014. So it's a 20-year period. And I couldn't really say if it's more optimistic or more pessimistic. It depends on the angle, where do you see it. But there's this increasing, what do you call it? Increasing aspiration towards democracy. In the beginning, it was just simply a cure to corruption, and then more and more it becoming an end in itself. So even at certain point in the second period, there were actors that would argue, or even the media itself in its editorial argued that maybe we should leave corruption alone so that our democracy will still be protected and still thrive. So that was very interesting for me, because then you can see that meanings change and relationships between hegemonic concepts also change. I hope that answers your question, Sharon. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I think we've got Shukri. Yeah, Shukri went.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kanti. That was a very nice presentation. My question is regarding your conceptualization of corruption. The concept of corruption itself is within in the dynamic relationship between many what is it? The holder of power relation, and I assume that's supposed to be kind of counter conceptualization of the corruption beside the dominant concepts of the corruptions that you have addressed, dominating by the neoliberal developmentalisms, something like that. So my question is, do you also identify, did you identify also a kind of counter concepts of corruptions? Because to my knowledge, it's quite a lot of Indonesian high rank officials that was characterized as a very good person, but also at the same time corrupt with the formal definition of corruption by the government. So, for example, in the last I think in 2000, the Minister of Religion, Said Agil Siroj, if you remember, Said Agil Siroj he is for the Muslim people, he is the member of the family of the Prophet, because he is one of the Habib family. Yeah. So for many people, he is a kind of holy person actually, and he's Hafiz. Yeah. He is also a lecturer at WIN. So I mean, for many people, it is probably impossible for people like Said Agil Siraj to do a very bad corruption. Instead, it is just because we have, as you mentioned in your paper, we have a different perception about the corruption. So in the case of Said Agil Siraj, as he defended himself, it was just about the bureaucracy, about the mechanisms, about the procedure that he didn't follow correctly. So I mean, for those who did not recognize the dominant conceptualization of corruption, were there any alternative conceptualization of corruption or alternative discourse of corruption? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Uda Shukri. That's a very good question. I think the alternative discourse, I would say, because my field, business and management, is currently looking at different ways of conceptualizing things like ethics, governance, anti-corruption, and calling for more efforts on decolonizing the literature in business and management. So it's all about bringing in indigenous knowledge, indigenous concepts. And I think it's interesting that in the media discourse, they also talk about the concepts of leadership from Islamic point of view. For example, that leaders have to be amanah, they have to be trustworthy and all that. And also some criticisms toward materialism. So this is another way of conceptualizing corruption that will still go towards what do you call it, critiquing all these practices, but the emphasis is more about leadership, and leadership, especially the elites of the nations, who you can say maybe have more agency in terms of their decision making and the policies that they make. But of course, I also realize there's another argument that can be made in relation to this, which is the presence of oligarchs who are very powerful and really dismantle the whole systems. And maybe in this case, there isn't much agency anymore from the state or from our politicians or our what do you call it, our leaders. So there's this sort of lots of nuances when you look at this, but maybe that's one of the alternative discourse, if that can be something that that is what do you call it, an opponent to the more mainstream discourse about what do you call it, achieving democracy, trying to educate people about public-private responsibility, which is not very much based on indigenous knowledge, the one that I discussed earlier. Does that answer your question? So maybe that's one alternative discourse that I can identify from what I've read so far.
So what about at the media level itself? Did you find groups of people, for example, fight for this alternative discourse?
Okay. I can see that in academia, they try to put more academic papers looking at how leaders or leadership is conceptualized in indigenous discourses. So that can be one way to pursue this. But in the media itself, it's very much a minority, Uda Sukri, people who talk other than in the framework of trying to achieve democratization, especially Western liberal democracy. No one has said anything much other than that. And then the concept of public-private, for example, public-private dichotomy, and also the idea that corruption is only in the public sector and the private sector is mostly just victims and not the perpetrators themselves. It's very much marginalized. It's not many people talk about corruption that way in the media compared to the more mainstream or the more dominant ones.
Okay. We still have time for another question if anybody would like to jump in.
Oh, I can see my friends, Mas Ridwan, Pak Mutia Riza, Mbak Desi, saying hello.
Just saying hello. Mbak Kanti, I'm not sure if you're familiar with an article that was written by Kanishka Jayasuriya, but that was in 2020, and that was, let me just check, I think it was called The Rise of the Right, Populism and Authoritarianism in Southeast Asian Politics.
Okay.
And he makes an argument there that the rise of populism in the Philippines and Thailand and Indonesia is related to a kind of reaction against good governance, against the good governance agenda, including anti-corruption commissions in all of those countries.
Yeah.
Basically, there's a number of reasons, but the one that I remember was that the kind of the oligarchs found that the good governance agenda is annoying for them. Gets in the way of doing, you know, of the collusion that's traditionally happened between business and politics in those countries, and it's it's basically something that disrupts that traditional way of doing things, and so so that's one way, I guess, of describing the kind of the reaction now against good governance and against anti-corruption commissions. I don't know. It's probably I just threw that in there as something which I think you should probably
look at. Yeah, I would love to get the details on what's the name of the author again, Pa David?
Kanishka Jayasuriya. I'll just copy it to the chat.
Okay, thank you, Pa. Well, if you want to maybe explore about anti-corruption resistance, I think from my field work, because I looked at business government corruption, the resistance that I found, it's mostly because, maybe it's a bit similar, maybe it's different. I'm not sure, because my informants talk a lot about socioeconomic inequality, Pak David. So the collusion between business and government, it has its own context. One of my informants actually argued that it's now different, Mbak Kanti. It was 2014. You talk about which government employee or which bureaucrats. The bureaucrats who work in Mas Dwiki's office, the tax office, are now considered more professional and more clean, and they're less likely to agree to engage in practices many labeled as corruption. So they will say no to corruption more easily than the others. They will be because they have enjoyed a significant boost in their income with the remuneration. So that is one thing that I think it's very interesting. Because of this bureaucratic reform programs, there are certain government institutions that have enjoyed a better living standards, better standards of living, and that makes them less prone to corruption. So the business people themselves admitted that, people in the tax office, they're now like people who work in the bank, in the private sector, Mbak Kanti. They already enjoyed a better living standard. So, but it's only for these certain government ministries, unfortunately. But the others, other than the Ministry of Finance, tax office especially, they didn't enjoy, they haven't enjoyed the same kind of salary standards, and this is being maintained through a certain system that it's a performance based what do you call it, remuneration system, which rank government ministries and rank the bureaucrats themselves and determine their corresponding salary. And this system itself, it creates inequality. So corruption can never be fully eliminated using the current framework, because the system itself perpetuates inequality. So this is another, I think, another paper to write and another presentation. But yeah, I think from my understanding is the resistance that people have towards corruption, it's more based in socioeconomic inequality, not because of other things that I can't even think of what motives that people might have, I mean, to defend their practices against corruption, especially in the context of bureaucratic corruption. Maybe Pak Greg want to share something too? No? Okay. Thank you, Pak David.
Okay.
You have the preferences in the chat box. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's just it's something I used for teaching recently, and I found it quite interesting, and it relates to, you know, it puts anti-corruption commissions and the reaction against them in a broader context also. So it actually looks across countries. That's something that the author Kanishka is very good at. He's kind of standing back and seeing patterns across different countries, and so it's worth having a look at, I think.
Okay. So this author, he or she, I'm not sure.
It's a he.
Did he also talk about like socioeconomic inequality, or it's more about political corruption? So between like I don't know, maybe transnational business and local elites.
Yeah, he looks at rather than going too much into detail, he tends to look at at bigger forces. He's a kind of very much a structuralist thinker, so yeah, I don't know if I can really answer your question. Have a look at the article.
Okay, okay, it's okay. Thank you, Pat.
Maybe Charan has read it. I'm not sure he can answer. Because Kanishka is actually a Perth-based academic now. I mean, he's at Murdoch University. He's professor of politics at Murdoch University.
Okay.
A lot about different countries in Southeast Asia. He's a very, very interesting and original thinker in some ways. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's already 2:56, and so
Greg.
no more. Oh, there is another question from Greg. Wants to say one last thing.
I just wanted to ask, what is your take on now that it is passed, the Omnibus Job Creation Bill? Will this create new understandings, new discourses of corruption, different sorts of actions against it, or will it just be pretty much business as usual after this is put into effect?
Ooh. That's a challenging one. I think my focus when I look at this bill, the discussions about this bill, it's the focus has been on ketenaga kerjaan, ya. It's about labor, Greg. I didn't really look at, because I think there was some clauses on simplifying procedures in an effort to eliminate corruption. But then that's precisely my critique. I mean, you want to eliminate corruption, but which one? Which one is it that you want to eliminate? It has been, the focus has always been on bureaucratic corruption, the everyday bureaucrats that just earn salary. They try to top up their salary from uang lelah, honor, and the similar things around that. But no one wants to really ask the question, are we also talking about corruption in the higher level, the political corruption? And clearly from the passing of this bill itself, the process, if you can say it's already corrupt. So how can you say that you can attack corruption or you can dismantle corruption with a bill that in the process is, some scholars would argue, is already corrupt? So yeah, I guess that's my answer. But
okay. Well, it is really time now. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much to you, Kanti, and for, yeah, really stimulating discussion, and also for distributing the paper. So I think that's...
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pak David, and everyone at Indonesia Study Group.
I think that brings the Indonesia Study Group to its last, to the end of the last seminar of the year. Don't forget, we've got the WAIF coming up. Mbak Kanti gave a paper last year to the WAIF.
Yes, I missed out on the deadline, Pak, this year. So is it okay if I just participate? Can people?
Oh, you can certainly participate. We'll be sending out a form for to register for participation today or tomorrow.
Oh, excellent.
Keep an eye out for that. I think it's the 26th of October. So we're expecting, and there's been a lot of interest. A lot of people sent in abstracts. We had to, reject a lot of abstracts because there were so many. So it's going to be an interesting day for sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. And
thank you.
I'll
Take
see you.
care. See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, makasih Uni Kanti. Thank
Terima
you.
kasih udah Syukri. Keep well.